Hello everyone, welcome back to Governance This Week. Today we take a closer look at online disinformation during wartime. My name is Roeland Scholtalbers and with me is a special guest, the Secretary General of the European Digital Media Observatory, Paula Gori. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you very much, Roeland.
So, Paula, online disinformation has a significant impact on public perception and decision making. So let's start maybe by looking at some examples of how online disinformation has influenced conflicts and how these narratives become influential.
So let me first start with some background. When we are in a case of a war, or also in crisis, we saw it with COVID, we are desperately in look for information. So at the same time, we are also emotionally, if you want, involved. There's a war, of course, we get all emotional about that. When we had COVID, we were kind of in search for information, but we're also fearing about our life. And not only us, but also the people who are really in the conflict. They are looking for information and for information on the basis of which they can build their decisions. Think of if you have to know where a bomb shelter is or where to find potable water or evacuation routes and so on. So information is really key. What does disinformation do? It actually creates uncertainty in a moment in which we need information and we are emotionally involved. So basically we start seeing all this content around and we don't know who to trust. So either we don't go for action because we think we don't trust anybody, or we go for action but we go irrationally, or we panic. And unfortunately this is something that is happening also now in the Middle East. So which are the risks for that? Protests, for example. If, for example, you see information about, think of the bombing of the hospital in Gaza that is still not attributed, no? So if you start saying that one party did that bombing, you may have protests around in the world against that state. Or think of the conflict in the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It revamped the Nazi narrative, for example. So it's this really clear effect and impact of this information related to a conflict that then actually expands also to action among citizens and among other realities around the conflict.
Paula, can you help us understand who the key actors are in online disinformation campaign during wartime? What motivates them to engage in these activities, and how do they benefit from spreading false information during a conflict?
That's a very good question, Roeland. Let's say that, I will simplify, but let's say that the two main actors are the state-backed campaigns. So when this information is spread by states, or you have various less coordinated actors. When it's state-backed, it means that there is a lot of money behind. And the more money behind, the more pervasive and also the more effective a campaign can be. It's kind of a drop after a drop and a drop after a drop. And in this case, it becomes systematic. It means that it involves many channels, and it also means that there are large volumes. We saw that, for example, again in Ukraine with Russian disinformation, where bots were used, trolls were used, where false websites were produced, where false accounts of journalists were produced in order to create confusion in society. So we were asking about the benefits. Well, there are lots of benefits, unfortunately, for the malign actors. One is confusion. You create confusion in society. You don't know what to trust or not. The other is polarization. Actually, it is not only the benefit, but it also plays on what we already have, a polarized society. Then you create an artificial sense of support. So you basically create a context in which people think that the large majority of the society is actually supporting one party compared to the other. And so, as said, when it's state-backed, usually you recognize it because it's a lot of different initiatives and you can clearly understand the investment that is behind. While when it's like less coordinated actions, the benefits are the same, but I would put some additional ones. One is community feeling, in the sense that you have this impression, you spread this information, you see how much people engage with this information, you think you are part of a community. And the other is monetization. This is something that we often explain also at EDMO. You can monetize a lot with this information, you can do a lot of money. And so this, if you want individuals or sharing this information on conflicts and that are not under an organized action, they monetize on the content, unfortunately. So they use a very difficult moment where lives are at stake to actually monetize on content. So I would say these are the two main actors behind.
Okay, so let's look at a concrete example in this sphere.
Okay, so probably the most easy example right now is related to the conflict in Ukraine, where you could clearly see that there was an organized disinformation strategy by Russia. How could we see that? We could see lots of disinformation entering the EU member states. We could see how actually there were lots of trolls and bots involved. So basically content that was put online was immediately further reshared. The moment that the same spreaders were putting that content, it was immediately reshared or recommended. There were official media state sources that were spreading disinformation. There was officials of Russia who were spreading on their accounts this information after the sanctions of the EU that made it to close the transmission of RT and Sputnik. We could still see actually this information, for example, on Telegram, if not by the channels, by the journalists working for those channels. And then we had typo squatting, which is basically producing websites which look very similar to official, I don't know, CNN, BBC or so on, a website which were actually fake. And we actually even spotted a web page that was alleged to be a fact-checking website. And among the fact-checking articles, they were producing what we call fake news, so disinformation. So clearly we could see this as an organized action in which the same content was starting on one side and was then continuing being repeated on all these different outlets.
So we're clearly talking about a very complex issue. We're talking about state and non-state actors. We're talking about a lot of money being involved. So the question comes naturally, what kind of strategies and tools are available for governance and other organizations to tackle these kind of disinformation campaigns effectively, especially during times of conflict?
Okay, I would take this starting a little more holistically. So we have to be prepared when something like that happens. So I would start with a long-term strategy, which is media and information literacy, so education for all ages, not only in schools. Then strengthening the media ecosystem. If you have an independent media ecosystem that is strong enough, you can really have a filter towards this information. And of course also ensuring the independence of civil society organizations who are on the ground and who are doing a very important job actually. The other step, still long-term, is capacity building. If you want to contrast this information, you also have to understand how it works. It means that officials that are working or media professionals and so on have to know how this information works, how it is produced, how is it spread. For example, research shows us that actually this information spreads way more and faster online than accurate information. Or, for example, that visuals have a long-term impact on our memory compared to text. So if you want to counter that, you have to know that, but also if you want to use a similar strategy. So rather than being a media that uses lots of text, start with images. Or we saw it, for example, with COVID-19, many official information from authorities was less statements with long text. That doesn't stay in our memory. You need to work with that. So I would say this is the long-term strategy. In the short term, clearly, this is a matter of monitoring disinformation narratives for national and security defense purposes. And there we know there is in Europe, we have the European External Action Service, and that, of course, all the ministries in the various member states are working on that. Clearly, this is very important. Whichever action shall be proportionate, considering the fact that we're talking about freedom of expression and freedom of the press. So any action should, in any case, be taken very carefully. And this is indeed the approach that we have in the EU. We are based on fundamental rights. So whenever there is an action taken, it should be something that is very limited, considering these fundamental rights.
Paula, at the School of Transnational Governance, we're very proud to host the Secretariat of the European Digital Media Observatory, EDMO. How does EDMO contribute to tackle disinformation?
So in the field of disinformation, we say that there is no silver bullet. We cannot have just one single solution to tackle disinformation. And this is why EDMO. EDMO is a multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary platform that has this whole of society approach. The idea is to have expertise in the different fields, bring the experts together, provide them with tools that are actually useful for collaboration, for coordination, and then see what happens. And so we have, for example, a network of fact-checkers, we have a network of researchers, we are mapping media literacy initiatives, and we are trying to identify standards that for media literacy initiatives. So you see many different expertises together, but this is also multidisciplinary. For example, in research, we go from people who have expertise in economics or political sciences or law to neuroscientists or computer scientists. This is very important. Think of what I was saying before. I mean, it's just I can, as a lawyer, I cannot know that images stay longer in my memory, but a neuroscientist can tell me, you know. So this is really key. EDMO is also part of the policy response to disinformation in the EU, as we are indeed members of the task force of the Code of Practice Against Disinformation. And let me also see that we are actually pioneers of an exercise which is related to data access. So EDMO is worked on a code on the basis of which the online platforms could give access to the researchers to the data with, of course, full compliance with GDPR. And we're now working on an intermediary body, an independent body that could actually be in the middle, if you want, between platforms and researchers. People always tend to think that I'm talking about things that are too technical when I talk about data access, but actually let me give you a very hypothetical example. If thanks to this data access we discovered that women aged 67, white and with high education tend to spread disinformation on migration, just hypothetically. Well, this actually gives us a way to actually go targeting that, trying to understand why this happens sociologically, economically, and so on, and find tailored solutions. So I think these hypothetical examples usually help understanding why this is so important. So let me say that in general, what is really important is this collaboration of different actors with different expertises, all going into one direction, but all, of course, providing solutions for their part.
You've also done some specific work on the war in Ukraine, haven't you?
Indeed, when Russia started invading Ukraine, we immediately built a database that actually includes fact-checking articles on produced by the various members of our network, which I really have to thank, because really they all acted immediately, and you can find it on our website. It can be filtered by country and by language. And then in parallel we set up a task force on disinformation on the war in Ukraine. And here again I really have to thank all the experts, European experts, and not only that joined this task force, because this was really where you could see that the mission was actually more important than ever. So they all volunteered immediately to join. And there the aim was trying to understand if we were ready for such a situation. And I would say the answer was yes and no. The task force produced 10 recommendations that span from like having more media literacy to protecting journalists and fact-checkers from secondary trauma, because think of the fact that they watch images every day that are related to people who die, war, and so on. So it's really shocking. To the fact that we need a proper research infrastructure to access the data, but in general to produce research on disinformation. So you can, of course, then check all these recommendations. But clearly the outcome was we could start coping with it, but we weren't ready.
As we conclude, Paula, what can viewers do to protect themselves from falling victim to online disinformation, and maybe also if they want to contribute to the efforts against online disinformation?
So when the Russia-Ukrainian conflict started, we actually produced a webpage which is called 10 Tips to Stay Away from Disinformation on the War. Let me just mention a few. First, be calm. Think before sharing. We are irrational people. We tend to be. We saw it also in other occasions. So before sharing, think if it's really worth sharing it. Then verify not only the content, but also the source. I mean, we tend to focus a lot on content, but even source can already give you a good help. Then there is this mantra, if it's too good or too bad to be true, then probably it isn't. So if you find a content that is really splashy, go and check on other 10 web pages of famous media outlets. If it's not there, probably it's a news that is not based on facts. Get in touch with independent fact checkers. They can all be contacted via WhatsApp. You can also do, for example, a Google reverse search, image reverse search if you want. But I mean, fact checkers are there. They can be contacted via WhatsApp. And this is key, let me say, regarding the images. We see so many images related, online, that are allegedly related to a conflict, that actually are related to conflicts that had happened years ago, you know. So it's really important to get in touch with the fact checkers. And then also be real about your skills. I mean, honestly, we cannot all be experts in COVID, on international relations, on migration, on climate change. We all have our limits. So rather than thinking that we can have a thorough knowledge of everything, let's be honest, let's try to think if we really can verify that information, and if not, let's stop and not further share.
So Paula, I agree, a little modesty doesn't harm, so let's keep that in mind. Let's maybe also tell our viewers that they can go to www.edmo.eu to find out more about the work of the European Digital Media Observatory, and of course subscribe to this channel for more episodes of Governance This Week. Paula, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.